They say the ruthless tiger never begs. But Mildred Campbell watched him do exactly that the night he grabbed her waist and refused to let her walk away from the table that would define the rest of her life. Franklin Chow was dying, and everyone in the triad underworld knew it. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer was destroying the head of the obsidian claw from within. 6 months, maybe less. The man who'd built a criminal dynasty on fear and precision for 35 years now needed support to climb stairs. His hands trembled lifting his teacup. And he had no son. Victor Wood, 34, his most trusted lieutenant, sharp, ambitious, hungry. A man who'd waited a decade for his moment, earned his position through calculated brutality and strategic brilliance. But in the Obsidian Claw's ancient triad hierarchy, only blood could claim the throne. Without a male heir, the organization would shatter. Victor would try to seize control, but without bloodline legitimacy, the old guard would never accept him. Civil War. Everything Franklin built across 3 decades would evaporate within months. That's when Franklin Chow looked across the obsidian room and saw Mildred Campbell. She was nobody. A waitress drowning in $250,000 of medical debt, working double shifts to keep her younger sister alive. 26 years old, pretty in an unremarkable way, the kind of woman designed to disappear into crowds. Her hands shook as she placed his final course before him, not from fear, but because her sister's doctor had called that afternoon with the ultimatum: pay the surgical deposit within 72 hours or begin end-of-life planning. Franklin Chow saw all of it in 30 seconds. The exhaustion carved into her young face, the desperation beneath her forced smile, the absolute absence of options that made a person reckless enough to consider the impossible. He saw a vessel, young, healthy, unconnected to his world. Someone who could be controlled through debt rather than loyalty, which made her paradoxically trustworthy, her motivations transparent, her needs quantifiable. Someone who would carry his legacy not from love or duty, but from survival. Someone who had nothing left to lose. When he made his proposal, $10 million to bear his son, full protection, complete medical care for her sister, Mildred's face went white. She stammered something about checking other tables. She turned toward the door, already moving in to escape. She made it 3 steps. His hand clamped around her waist with shocking strength for a dying man. Not violent, but absolutely immovable. He pulled her back, stopping her momentum, anchoring her to this moment, to this decision, to him. Their eyes locked. His were cold, intelligent, utterly certain. Hers were wide with raw horror, the look of someone watching their ordinary life incinerate in real time. In that electric second, she understood. She was no longer an anonymous waitress. She had been selected.
Claimed.
Her body, her future, her very existence had just become the final desperate gambit of a dying emperor. Franklin Chow watched her face cycle through shock, revulsion, terror, and finally, devastatingly, calculation. He watched her remember her sister's labored breathing. He watched her do the math on her impossible debt. He watched her realize she was standing at the intersection of damnation and salvation. He watched her stop trying to pull away. 72 hours, Mildred whispered. I need the first payment in 72 hours. Franklin Chow smiled for the first time in months. It was not a kind smile. You'll have it in 24, he said. And then you'll have everything. In the shadows, neither noticed Victor Wood standing at the threshold, watching with narrowed, calculating eyes. Watching his future crumble. Watching his empire slip away into the womb of a frightened waitress. The war had already begun. Mildred signed the contract at 2:47 a.m. in a conference room that smelled of leather and expensive cologne. Franklin's lawyer, Wei, skeletal with mortician's eyes, walked her through 37 pages, reducing her body to commodity. She barely heard him. Her hand moved mechanically, guided by memory of her sister's desperate coughing and the impossible number, $10 million, with $2.5 million released immediately. The money hit her account before dawn. By 6 a.m., she'd paid the hospital deposit, cleared 3 months of rent, and purchased a burner phone to tell her sister she was leaving for a private nursing position. The lie came easily. Everything came easily now that the decision was made. The compound sat 30 miles outside the city, hidden behind 12-foot walls and surveillance cameras. When the gate opened, Mildred's stomach dropped. This wasn't a house. It was a fortress dressed in architectural elegance, stone, dark wood, windows reflecting nothing back. The kind of place where people disappeared and nobody asked questions. A young man in a dark suit led her through echoing hallways lined with original paintings and marble floors. They stopped before a sitting room where a woman waited with the stillness of a coiled snake. Yun Miri was 53 and looked like winter itself, elegant, severe, utterly merciless. She wore white, which somehow made her more terrifying. "You must be the vessel," she said, her English precise and cutting. "My husband has many hobbies. Desperation appears to be his latest." Yun Miri moved close enough that Mildred could smell her perfume, something cold and floral. "You will address me as Mrs. Chow. You will stay in your assigned quarters. You will follow every medical protocol exactly. And you will remember something very important." She leaned in, voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "The moment you fail to produce a son, or the moment you become inconvenient, you become disposable. I have made 3 daughters disappear from scandal. A pregnant waitress would barely require effort." The threat landed like ice water. Mildred forced herself to hold the woman's gaze. This was her life now. Terror was simply the price of admission. She led Mildred upstairs to a heavy oak door, knocked once, then pushed it open without waiting. The room beyond was dim, medical equipment humming quietly. In a leather chair by the window sat Franklin Chow, looking smaller and more fragile than in the restaurant's dramatic lighting. He studied her, then his mouth quirked with something almost resembling amusement. "You came. I had a bet with myself that you'd take the first payment and disappear to Mexico." "I considered it," Mildred admitted before she could stop herself. Franklin Chow laughed, a raspy, painful sound that turned into a cough. When he recovered, his eyes held something that might have been respect. "At least you're honest. That's more than I get from most people." He gestured to a chair. "Seat. If you're going to carry my legacy, we might as well get acquainted." The first week was hell. Mildred fumbled with medications, mixed up dosages until the nurse caught her mistake. But she learned. She learned to anticipate when the pain would spike, to prepare the morphine before he had to ask. She learned which medications made him irritable and which made him reflective. She learned to be invisible when Victor would visit it, conducting business in low, tense voices that made the air dangerous. By the 3rd week, something shifted. "You never ask questions," he said one evening. "Everyone else in this house asks questions. What I'm thinking. What I'm planning. Who gets what when I'm gone." "It's not my business," Mildred replied carefully. "No," he agreed. "But you're curious. I can tell." She was desperately curious about this dying man who had hijacked her life with nothing but money and will. But curiosity felt dangerous here, like reaching toward a beautiful flame. "Tell me about your sister," he said. She did. About Emma's leukemia diagnosis at 19. About the experimental treatment insurance refused to cover. About working 3 jobs and still watching debt multiply like cancer cells. About the suffocating helplessness of loving someone you couldn't save. When she finished, Franklin was quiet. "I'm dying," he said finally, "and I've spent 58 years building something that matters. An organization. A name. Power that changed the city's geography. And in 6 months, it all becomes nothing. Victor Wood will try to take it, but he doesn't have the blood. The old families won't accept him. Everything I built will tear itself apart." He looked at her with sudden, raw intensity. You understand what it means to watch something you love die while you're still breathing. That's why I chose you, Mildred. Not because you're desperate. Because you understand what I'm fighting for." Before she could respond, the door burst open. Victor Wood's wife strode in, flanked by two women Mildred recognized, Chow's daughters from a previous marriage. All three radiated fury. "This is what you've reduced yourself to?" The eldest spat in Mandarin. "A breeding experiment with a common waitress?" Mildred started to retreat, but Franklin's hand shot out and gripped her wrist. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying decades of absolute authority. "You will treat her with respect, or you will leave my house. All of you." The women froze, shock rippling across their faces. "She carries my son," Franklin continued, grip tightening on Mildred's wrist. "That makes her more valuable to my legacy than any of you have ever been. Touch her, threaten her, even speak to her with disrespect again, and I will remove you from my will entirely." The silence felt explosive. Finally, the women retreated, rage barely contained. When they left, Franklin released her wrist. His hand was shaking. "They'll try again," he said quietly. "But I promise you, while I'm still breathing, nothing in this house will harm you." 3 nights later, Franklin called her to his study at midnight. The room was different, darker, heavier, lined with books and languages she couldn't read and photographs of men who looked like they'd built empires on other people's bones. "Close the door," he said. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room." He opened a leather folder and pushed medical reports across the desk. "Stage 4. Metastatic. 8 to 12 weeks remaining. My doctors are optimistic liars," he said. "I have 2 months. Maybe less." He pulled the folder back. "Victor Wood knows this. He's already consolidating power, making promises to younger captains. The moment I'm gone, he'll move to take control. And he'll fail because he doesn't have what the old guard demands." "Blood," Mildred whispered. "Blood," Franklin confirmed. "The Obsidian Claw has been led by a Chow for 3 generations. That lineage is the only thing holding the organization together. Without it, we fracture. Civil war. My life's work becomes a bloodbath." He stood slowly, moving to the window. "I need a son, Mildred. Not in some distant future. Now. Before my body gives out completely." He turned to face her, expression absolutely naked, fear and desperation barely contained. "I'm asking you to carry my child. My heir. To give me one final chance to ensure my legacy survives." The words hung between them like a bomb. "You already paid me," Mildred said, voice barely audible. "The contract was for caregiving. This is different." He placed a new document before her. $60 million. $20 million upon confirmation of pregnancy. The remaining 40 upon birth of a healthy male child. Full medical care. Armed protection. Your sister's treatment guaranteed for life. $60 million. The number was so absurd it didn't feel real. "You'd own me," she whispered. "No," Franklin said sharply. "You'd be the mother of my heir. The most protected person in this organization. The only one who matters." Something almost gentle crossed his face. "I'm asking, Mildred." Not commanding. "I know what I'm asking you to sacrifice. I know what carrying a monster's child means." "You're not a monster," she said automatically, then stopped, shocked by her own words. Franklin smiled sadly. "You haven't known me long enough to make that judgment." Mildred took the contract with shaking hands. "I need time to think." "You have until morning," he said. "After that, I'll find someone else." She didn't sleep. She sat in her quarters, staring at the numbers until they blurred, thinking about Emma's medical bills and her sister's future and the moral weight of bringing a child into this dark, violent world. She thought about Franklin's trembling hands and desperate eyes and the strange, unexpected understanding between them. She thought about what it meant to sell not just her time but her body, her womb, 9 months of her life. What would you have done in her place? At dawn, she returned to his study. Franklin looked like he hadn't slept either. I'll do it, Mildred said. But I have one condition. Name it. When this is over, when your son is born, you let me go.
No strines. No obligations.
I disappear, and you never contact me again. Franklin studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand.
Deal.
She shook it, and felt the last shred of her ordinary life slip away forever. The procedure was clinical, efficient, handled by a private fertility specialist who asked no questions. 3 weeks later, Mildred stared at the positive test, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Seeing the evidence made it violently real. Franklin's reaction was controlled, but she caught the flash of profound relief in his eyes. He immediately called his physician, who confirmed the pregnancy and scheduled the first ultrasound for 8 weeks. Those 8 weeks felt like holding her breath underwater. Franklin's health deteriorated noticeably. He could barely walk without assistance, and pain medication left him foggy. But he waited with fierce, focused patience. The ultrasound technician moved the wand across Mildred's belly in silence, studying the screen with professional detachment. Then she paused, adjusted the angle, and looked directly at Franklin. "Congratulations," she said. "It's a boy." Franklin's face transformed. For just a moment, the ruthless tiger disappeared entirely, replaced by something achingly human: joy, relief, vindication. He reached out and gripped Mildred's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," he whispered, and she realized he was crying. 2 days later, he called a meeting. Not just family, the entire inner circle. Mildred watched from the upstairs hallway as they filed into the great room. Yunmiri, ice personified. Victor Wood, radiating barely contained tension. The 3 daughters, faces set in identical masks of resentment. And, behind them, a dozen lieutenants who represented the power structure of the Obsidian Claw. Franklin stood at the head of the room, looking smaller and frilier than ever, but his voice carried absolute authority. "I have gathered you to announce the future of this organization," he began. "In approximately 7 months, my son will be born. My heir. The next leader of the Obsidian Claw." The silence was deafening. Then chaos erupted. "This is insane," one daughter shouted in Mandarin. "She's nobody. A waitress. You'd give our legacy to a bastard." "Enough." Franklin's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "My son will be legitimate. I will recognize him formally. And anyone who questions his right to inherit will answer to me." Victor Wood stood slowly, face a careful mask. "Jean Wu, with respect, this is unprecedented. The transition of power requires careful planning. Stability. This woman is an outsider. She has no understanding." "She carries my blood," Franklin interrupted. "That makes her more important than any of you." He let that hang. "I am updating my will effective immediately. My son inherits everything, the businesses, the territory, the leadership. All of it." Yunmiri finally spoke, voice like winter frost. "And what of your existing daughters? What of me? You would discard us for this transaction?" Franklin met his wife's gaze without flinching. "You will be provided for. Generously. But the throne passes to my son." He swept his gaze across the room. "I want to be very clear. The woman upstairs is under my absolute protection. If anything happens to her, if she so much as trips on a loose carpet, I will hold all of you accountable. Cross me on this, threaten her in any way, and you will discover that even dying, I remain the ruthless tiger." The threat landed with perfect precision. Most faces cycled through rage, calculation, and finally reluctant acceptance. But not Victor Wood. His expression remained carefully neutral, but his eyes promised murder. The compound transformed overnight into something that felt like a prison. Armed guards appeared everywhere, cameras multiplied, and Mildred found herself shadowed constantly by security Franklin had personally selected. The atmosphere grew toxic. Yun Miri stopped acknowledging her existence. The daughters whispered in Mandarin whenever she passed. Even household staff treated her with strange mixture of deference and dread. Victor Wood became a ghost, rarely visiting Franklin's quarters, conducting business elsewhere. His absence felt more threatening than his presence. By her 12th week, small things started going wrong. A loose carpet on stairs. A wet floor with no warning sign. Her prenatal vitamins went missing, then reappeared with a broken seal. The tea incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The cup appeared on her nightstand while she was in the bathroom, delivered by someone unknown. She lifted it to her lips, then stopped. The color was slightly off, the smell too bitter. Franklin's physician arrived within 20 minutes and tested it. His face went pale.
Rat poison.
Not enough to kill you immediately, but more than enough to terminate the pregnancy. Franklin's rage was biblical. He had the entire kitchen staff interrogated, security footage reviewed. But whoever delivered the tea had been careful. The hallways showed only shadows, angles that conveniently avoided cameras. 2 days later, Mildred couldn't sleep. She wandered downstairs for water and heard voices from the library. Low, urgent, conspiratorial. She moved closer, pressing against the wall outside the half-open door. Don't have much time. Victor Wood's wife. Tone sharp. She's 14 weeks now. After 20, it becomes too risky. People ask questions about late miscarriages. I don't care about questions. One of Franklin's daughters. I care about that bastard never taking a breath. My father has lost his mind, but we can still salvage this. The stares were too obvious. Victor Wood's voice, calm and calculating. We need something that looks natural. Stress-induced complications. A tragic loss no one can trace back to us. Mildred's hand flew to her mouth. They weren't just planning to hurt her. They were planning to kill her child with medical precision, to make it look like nature's cruelty rather than murder. She backed away, heart hammering. She had to tell Franklin. Going somewhere?
Mildred spoon.
Yun Miri stood at the hallway's end, backlit by moonlight, looking like death itself in white silk pajamas. I was getting water, Mildred whispered. Yun Miri smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Mildred had ever seen. Of course you were. Just be careful, dear. Pregnant women can be so clumsy in the dark. Franklin listened to everything. The tea, the overheard conversation, Yun Miri's veiled threat, with a stillness that frightened Mildred more than rage would have. When she finished, he sat for a long moment, breathing labored, hands trembling with something beyond illness. You leave tonight, he said finally. I should have done this weeks ago. I thought I could control them, thought my threats would be enough. I was wrong. Where? London. I have people there, a safe house prepared since the day you conceived. You'll have security, medical care, everything you need until the baby is born. He made a call in rapid Mandarin. When he finished, he looked at Mildred with something that might have been regret.
I'm sorry.
I brought you into this world, and now I'm sending you away to survive it. You're dying, Mildred said quietly. Faster than expected. My doctor gives me 3 weeks, maybe 4. He smiled bitterly. I won't meet my son, but at least I'll die knowing he exists, knowing my legacy survives. He took her hand. That's more than I deserved. More than you owed me. Something broke inside Mildred's chest. This dying man, this criminal who had purchased her body, she'd grown to care for him, to understand him, to see past the monster to the terrified human beneath. Thank you, she whispered, for my sister, for giving me a choice, even when it didn't feel like one. Franklin's eyes glistened. Take care of him. Teach him to be better than I was. That's all I ask. The arrangements happened with military precision. Choi Dae-young, Franklin's most trusted bodyguard, appeared at her door at 2 a.m. We have a 30-minute window, he said quietly.
No lagi.
Everything you need is already in London. They moved through the compound like shadows. They made it to the garage where a sedan waited, engine running. They were 2 miles from the compound when headlights appeared behind them, coming fast. "We have company," Choi said, utterly calm. "Hold on." The headlights multiplied. 2 became 4, then 6, 3 vehicles boxing them in with predatory precision.
"Victor's people," Choi said.
He must have had eyes on the compound. He pulled out a handgun. "Can you shoot?"
"No," Mildred gasped.
"Then stay down and pray." The first shot sparked off the sedan's reinforced frame. Choi cut across lanes, forcing civilian traffic to scatter. One SUV pulled alongside. Mildred glimpsed the driver, Victor Wood's brother-in-law, raising a pistol aimed at her. "Down!" Choi screamed. The window shattered. Mildred felt fire across her upper arm, heard herself scream. Blood bloomed through her sleeve. Choi slammed their sedan into the SUV with brutal force. The SUV spun out behind them. "The airstrip's got ground access," Choi said. "They're trying to force us to the exit. We're going off-road." He jerked the wheel left, crashing through the highway barrier down a steep embankment. They went airborne, then slammed into rough terrain with bone-jarring force. Behind them, one SUV rolled spectacularly. The second landed hard, but stayed upright. Choi navigated by instinct through scrub brush and industrial wasteland. Ahead, lights appeared, the airstrip's perimeter fence and a private jet, engines running. "Almost there," Choi said. Then his window exploded. The bullet caught him in the shoulder. He wrestled back control with a grunt of agony. They smashed through the fence onto the tarmac. "Run," Choi gasped, blood at the corner of his mouth. "I'll hold them." "You're coming." "I'm already dead." He pulled a second gun. "That's your son in there. Franklin's legacy."
"Go."
Mildred stumbled from the sedan, wounded arm screaming. The jet was 100 yards away. Behind her, the SUV crashed through. Doors flew open. Men emerged, all armed. "Go!" Choi roared, then opened fire. Mildred ran, hand pressed to her belly, tears streaming as gunfire erupted behind her. She heard Choi's controlled shots, heard return fire. 50 yards. Her lungs burned. Choi's firing stopped. In the terrible silence, she heard his voice one last time. "For the tiger." Then automatic fire, brutal and final. Mildred didn't stop. 20 yards. The flight attendant screamed at her to hurry. Behind her, boots pounded tarmac. Bullets sparked off the jet's fuselage. Hands grabbed her, hauling her up. The door slammed shut. The jet lurched forward, accelerating down the runway. Through the window, she saw Victor's men giving chase, still firing. She saw Choi's body sprawled beside the sedan, motionless, heroic, gone. The nose lifted. The ground fell away. They were airborne. Only then did Mildred fully break down, great heaving sobs tearing from her chest. Dr. Park appeared with medical supplies. "I need to examine your arm and check on the baby."
"The baby."
Through panic, Mildred felt her abdomen, searching desperately for wrongness. "He's fine," Dr. Park said gently. "Your body protected him." He cleaned and bandaged the graze, then conducted an ultrasound. The steady thump of the baby's heartbeat filled the cabin, strong, resilient, oblivious. "Perfect," Dr. Park confirmed. Mildred closed her eyes as the jet climbed higher. She was going to London. She was going to survive. And in 6 months, she would give birth to the heir of the Obsidian Claw. Choi's last words echoed, "For the tiger." She placed her hand over her belly. "For the tiger," she whispered back. London greeted her with Rain and Wei, the skeletal lawyer, holding a black umbrella. He didn't speak until they were in the car. "Franklin Chow passed this morning at 6:47 a.m., he said quietly, peacefully, in his sleep. His physician confirmed he felt no pain. Mildred had known this was coming. but hearing it made real felt like losing gravity. Franklin was gone. He left you something, Wei said, handing her an envelope with her name in Franklin's trembling script. She waited until alone in the London safe house before opening it. Mildred, if you're reading this, I'm dead, and you and my son are safe. That's all I could have hoped for. I know what I asked was monstrous. I purchased your body, hijacked your life, dragged you into violence you never chose. There's no sufficient apology. But I hope you understand. I was drowning, and you were the only shore I could reach. Raise him well. Teach him kindness. Teach him that power without conscience destroys everything. I built an empire on fear and blood, and I don't want that for him. He has a choice I never had, to be better. The 60 million is yours, free and clear. Your sister's care is guaranteed for life. You owe me nothing. Thank you for letting me die with hope instead of despair. Franklin. Mildred folded the letter carefully, vision blurred. She placed it beside her bed, a final artifact from a man who'd been equal parts savior and captor. The months passed in strange, isolated peace. She saw doctors, read books, walked through parks. Her sister recovered fully. They spoke weekly on encrypted calls, Mildred inventing elaborate stories. The nightmares came regularly, Choi's body, Franklin's trembling hands, bullets sparking off metal. But they faded slowly. On a gray March morning, 6 months after fleeing, Mildred gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He had Franklin's serious dark eyes and a full head of black hair. "What's his name?" the midwife asked. Mildred looked down at the tiny, perfect face. "Franklin Chow Jr.," she said quietly. Later, alone, she held her son and wondered about his future. Victor would come for him eventually? Would the obsidian claw fracture, as Franklin predicted? Would her son grow up normal, never knowing the world of blood and power that was his birthright? Or would the legacy find him anyway? She looked into his unfocused eyes and made a silent promise. Whatever came, whatever darkness inherited from his father's world, she would protect him. She'd survived bullets and poison and a dying man's desperate gambit. She'd earned this life, this safety, this chance. "You get to choose," she whispered to her sleeping son. "You get to be whoever you want to be." But even as she said it, she saw it. The shadow of his father in the set of his tiny jaw, the quiet intensity already forming. Franklin Chow's blood ran through his veins, and blood always told its story eventually. The future remained unwritten. But the legacy, for better or worse, survived. If you want to know what happens when Victor discovers the heir survived, when the past comes hunting, when Franklin Jr. learns the truth about the empire built in his name, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next.